Kia ora koutou and welcome to the Internet of Awesome Things, a podcast all about the Internet of Things brought to you by Spark. I'm Russell Brown. So far in this series we've talked about the many benefits of the Internet of Things, but with those benefits come some risks, and that's what we'll cover in this episode. In some ways, IoT security mirrors our experience with the Internet itself. We'd have designed email differently back in the day if we'd thought about spam, for example. And with IoT, we've already had a few scares. Not least, IoT botnets harnessing security cameras and digital recorders and attacking the rest of the internet. Yep, that happened. But have we learned our lessons a bit quicker this time around? And how should we prepare on privacy and security as billions of new things light up around us? I'm joined now by two people whose job it is to know. Independent security consultant Erica Anderson and Head of Spark Security Josh Bahlman. Well, welcome to you both.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Russell.
Now, Erica, let's start with the basics. What are the security challenges for the Internet of Things and how do they differ from general IT security?
The differences between the two, they're really kind of the same. In a sense, you are handling and handing your data to someone and putting it and transmitting that over a piece of technology that you can't control in exchange for something. For example, when you're using an online shop, you're putting all of your sensitive personal information into a website in order to buy goods online. And it's really kind of the same concept when it comes down to, being able to turn on your heat pump when you're driving home and being able to actually transmit that request over to something in order to turn that on. So it's kind of, in a sense, trading that data for that convenience. But it all comes down to the same critical security controls. And, both of those things, just like a website, the technology that kind of drives the intranet component of your heat pump needs to be patched and needs to be taken care of. You need to make sure that access is pretty well controlled. But they're kind of the same.
So it's benefits and risks, isn't it? We didn't have computer viruses until we could actually connect up computers, which is a really useful thing to do. But, Josh, the key here, I guess, is minimising the risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to carry on from what Erica was saying, people aren't thinking about that risk when they're developing the outcomes for IoT. They're literally trying to solve a problem or make something easier for people to do. So it's about getting fast to market and putting some cool features on. It's not talking. They don't think about how do you secure this device? Is this going to impact someone's life if something happens to this device, or what could this device do on the broader internet? Yeah.
Are we catching up now on an era where, as I understand it, a lot of the early connected devices went out without much thought for security?
Are we catching up? I think some vendors, like reputable vendors, are thinking about it. But no, I think there's the counter's happening. You're getting a lot of cheap devices produced and a lot of cheap manufacturing places around the world. And they don't care. They need to get this stuff out into the market as fast as possible to make money. They're not really thinking about, do you need a capability of patching it, or should it be patched? Or it's not really something that they're really thinking about in the lower end of the market. And that's where the mass amount of these IoT devices are coming from.
And the EU has actually started to force the issue now and said you can't have hard-coded default passwords, which seems obvious, doesn't it? But is it going to take regulation to stop these things being built like that?
Yeah, I think unfortunately it is going to take regulation, and it even goes into the U.S. as well. So they have the California Act, where although it's quite broad, they're requiring that these devices have some type of security features. Although they don't specify what those features are, it's at least one good positive step towards actually making sure these devices are secure. So I think unfortunately, regulation is what's going to force a lot of these other organizations, the ones that aren't as big as those large corporates who might have the enough capability and resources to take security seriously, but it's going to force all of the other lower-hanging companies to actually do something about it. So I think that is going to hopefully push the point home and make a lot of organizations actually think about, in their whole development lifecycle, how are we actually going to maintain these components? How are we going to keep them patched? What are we going to do if there's a vulnerability? How are we going to protect access to that device? And to make them think about it before they push all of those hardware.
And I guess the thing here is that it involves devices where we don't necessarily think immediately of InfoSec security. I mean, Josh, the botnets that have appeared so far, largely exploited security cameras that were connected to the internet and things like personal video recorders.
Yeah.
You know a bit about this. What happened with those?
Well, I think you're talking about Mariah in the initial case where it took down a massive DNS platform in the US, which actually took out most of the internet for a huge amount of big corporations like Spotify and the Facebooks, etc. And Mariah was, it's still kicking about. It's still sitting there. It's probably being used for some sort of denial of service attack. But what's interesting has been, I guess, some of maybe the broader security community's response to that and building other sorts of botnets to actually combat this problem. So you've got all these.
So there were white hat botnets. Battling the bad botnets.
Well, I think, to be honest, some of them was probably a bit more black hat versus black hat. But you've got, you had Mariah on one hand that was used to do denial of service. Then you had Brickerbot, which was a frustrated security individual who went out and started compromising the Mariah bots so he would actually just take them offline. And then you had someone who had a slightly softer approach, which built the Hajime botnet, and that went out there and tried to patch these things or secure them, which was it's the battle of the botnets out there at the moment. Yeah.
That's bizarre. They were largely used for denial of service attacks, flooding connections to take websites offline. Is there anything more bad guys could do with botnets like that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, yeah, the American one was hitting their primary DNS service, which then had a huge impact. But you could. I mean, we've seen ransomware type stuff in the past. You could also use these to attack other things in other ways, I guess. So if you stick something onto the internet these days, it's going to get knocked on, thousands of times a day from people like who are trying to just see what's out there on the internet. So that you can also use it for more of an offensive, trying to find out what's vulnerable to take that over type of a thing as well. Yeah.
I suppose we should define what we're talking about when we talk about IoT security. I mean, to me, it seems to divide up two ways. There's data privacy and the security of devices and systems. They're quite different things, aren't they, Erica?
Yeah, no, definitely. Two very different things. Because when you look at IoT from a security point of view, you're agreeing to use this technology to transmit data and you're trusting it. But you still have a bit of due diligence you can do in yourself. How can you actually trust that thing before you blindly start feeding it all of your personal information? Whereas from a privacy point of view, you're using this device for convenience. So you in a sense have to give it your data in order to get the service in return. So, you kind of agree to any type of privacy risks. So you need to make sure that that's device itself is quite secure to protect that data and make sure that the data remains private, but they are two entirely different things.
Yeah, because we've talked in this series about things like healthcare wearables that are actually, they gather and transmit quite a lot of personal information about us. How are you approaching that, Josh?
Personally, I use a wearable, as you can see. I think you just have to be wary about signing up to things. I think, maybe gone are the days, but they're probably still around about people clicking through and accepting all the privacy terms and conditions. I see, since GDPR has come in the EU, a lot of companies are really simplifying some of the language around it. If you look at the Spark privacy terms and conditions now, we've really tried to sort of frame them up so they're user readable and they're short and they make you understand exactly what data we're looking at and how we use it for maybe network assurance, etc. And then if there's also options that you can opt out of that type of data too. So I think companies are really thinking about how to simplify the messaging because it is a really important thing for customers now.
And at the other end of the scale, you've got things like the energy sector where IoT looks like a really good solution, but that's infrastructure and the idea of power stations being taken out is kind of scary. I mean, Erica, you used to work at CERT, which is the government security agency. I'm assuming they're looking at that stuff already.
Yeah, so, when I used to work at CERT, their data and their information all relies on the amount of reports that come in from New Zealanders, as well as sharing information from other countries like the EU and like the US. So it's definitely something that is on the radar for New Zealand government. But it's quite a hard problem to tackle. So I think whatever happens in New Zealand is probably going to be led by what other countries are planning on doing in terms of regulation and how they'll encourage companies and organizations to actually take security seriously, but also be able to educate consumers to, whether or not they should be trading off this convenience to use this new piece of technology.
Josh, what's the role of network operators like Spark here?
I think it's interesting. I mean, we're going to, of course, be providing the mobile and the broadband connectivity and new 5G with extra capacity and speed to things that are going to want to connect up to it. So it's a real big problem for us to see how this is going to progress. Gartner's talking about 20 billion devices, et cetera, exponential growth, and I'm sitting there going, ooh, how are we going to sort of handle the capacity and then the threats on this network, and how are we going to sort of break it up so we can protect it better? So we've got a big conversation that needs to play out over the next wee while as we're building our 5G capability. Because I think that's really going to be, when you're offering gig connections to the internet for a piece of really cheaply developed IoT device, there's a real huge risk there around, you put Mirai on that type of capacity, you've got a problem. Yeah.
I guess as a vendor of IoT solutions, you do have that choice. You can buy the better kit, the more secure kit, can't you?
I mean, our IoT services are really around, building solutions for customers, and we have the ability to sort of architect that in a proper way, as well as choose the devices that we're putting on our network. Those are the ones that me, as a security person, is not really worried about as much. It's really the ones that we don't have control of. So, the parallel importing, people buying off, cheap websites on the internet in massive quantities is the real issue that we're going to have, yeah.
Are there IoT devices that we don't need to worry about because there's not much harm can come? I'm thinking of soil moisture sensors on farms. I can't see how they could be harnessed into a botnet, or am I wrong?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to, so there's two ways for a security risk to have an impact. It's either going to have an impact on yourself because you yourself are going to lose that personal information or the data that sensor's transmitting, or you're going to be used to attack others. So it's, although from a point of view of thinking about a whole bunch of IoT equipment on a farm, perhaps losing that data about the actual farm itself, about, the livestock and the soil is not too bad. But, thinking back to, Josh's point around the Mirai botnet, those are a whole bunch of new components that can be used to attack others. So I think really everything when it comes to IoT is quite important.
So what specifically are you doing about it, Josh? You as Spark.
Yeah, well, I guess so. As we sort of, we're architecting our 5G network and what that means, we have a few ways to break up networks to be able to sort of, I guess, stop them getting accessed by the internet. And there's a few ideas that we're kicking around, and one in fact over lunch today was around how we can use network slicing to isolate untrusted IoT versus trusted IoT. So, we're looking at building networks that will actually help facilitate untrusted IoT so we can actually protect the rest of the internet and our customers from getting attacks and attacked, yeah. So
there is, I referred to that responsibility role. There's a responsibility role as a big vendor and the network operator.
I think there's like a telco good citizenship thing here that I think we do feel responsible for, as well as trying to protect our customers' privacy if they are going to go and buy these, because we can't stop them in reality, so we need to help them protect themselves, absolutely.
The other thing where it seems like security could be an issue is telematics, IoT devices in cars. Maybe there's a privacy issue, but there's certainly a security issue about the control of a vehicle being taken over. How realistic a fear is that?
I mean, it's the same as a security risk. I mean, definitely when it comes to assessing the security risk of a Fitbit versus a car, you probably take a bit more precaution and do a bit more research about the car itself. But it's really kind of, you can break it down into the same components. These cars have, software in them that help run and make a whole bunch of new fancy, newfangled features. And you'd want to be concerned as to, okay, well, how is the firmware in my car actually going to be updated? If there is a way for an attacker to gain access and control of, my car itself, how can I feel comfortable that it's going to be fixed? How can I feel comfortable as to how people can actually access my car to make those patches? So it kind of comes down to the same things, but I would say when it comes to vehicles, there's a lot more, risk involved. So I would sincerely hope car makers would be considering security before they're pushing out any type of vehicles versus, a fitness watchmaker probably doesn't have as many concerns.
I guess with general IoT security, there are security standards for devices. Is something of that kind emerging for IoT?
Well, there's the regulation, for sure, that's going to kind of encourage better development practices using IoT. But in terms of standards itself, it kind of follows along the same standards of how you build secure software. So, making sure that you're thinking about how you're going to maintain it in the long run, how you're going to control access to it. It's the same way that you would manage a web application versus, firmware in your watch. But it really kind of follows the same standards.
But I guess it's a lot bigger. There are already more IoT devices out there than there are us.
Totally, yeah. Which gets quite tricky because, something that IoT device makers need to consider is like, okay, so how am I actually going to push out patches? For myself, I've got a smart TV at home, and it's really sad to consider how long it took me to actually apply updates to it. And I consider myself like quite computer savvy. So I can't even imagine how, my dad and mom probably feel if they're trying to do the same thing. But it's like, are you going to rely on your users to actually have to push out those updates versus are you going to do over the airs or force updates? But there's a whole bunch of different business impacts that organizations have to consider. If they're pushing out an update, it might cause a reboot. Well, you don't really want to reboot a very critical device while someone might be using it. So, you need to kind of figure out how that's going to work for your users.
Now, didn't you decline to buy a heat pump recently because it was actually internet connected and you weren't happy with the security?
Oh, no, totally. Yeah. Which is, it's quite funny because, last week I was at, one of those Home Idea Center workshops and listening to a seminar about heating and cooling. And the salesperson, I won't go into detail as to who it was, but they're going on and on about how, you can turn on your heat pump while you're in your car headed home. And I was sitting in the audience and just Googling the name and security vulnerabilities. And I was like, ooh, there's actually quite a long list. And, the best way for people to assess whether or not a company is taking security seriously is literally just Googling the name, Googling security, and see what comes up. People are very vocal on social media and on threads about, hey, I reported this vulnerability or this issue. The vendor never responded. They never issued a patch. They go silent on the issue. And that just kind of proves that they're not taking security seriously. So it doesn't mean that you have to troll through code and, look at technical diagrams. I think it's just a matter of what type of feeling, how comfortable are you when looking at the face of this company, and are they actually going to take security seriously?
I still don't think they necessarily understand it. A friend of mine bought a new gas heater, a gas flame heater that for his house, and he had the option of connecting it to his Wi-Fi, so he did. And then he had a look at the box and found out that there was an admin portal, so he logged onto it with default credentials. And then he sort of had a little look around the code and realised that he could turn all of the heating right up and then shut down all the valves, which would essentially overheat the thing in a few, I don't know how long, but it really causes some issues. And so he contacted the vendor and said, hey, there's some issues with your the software that you're running on these heaters, when you connect them to the Wi-Fi. You might want to think about these things here that you may want to go away and fix. And the response was something that we've heard for decades, really, which is, oh, no one would ever do that. So that type of mentality, when you're talking about these manufacturers, are really just wanting Erica to be able to turn a heater on for when she's in the car going home on a cold Wellington day. They don't care. It's not something that's actually in their thought process.
There's definitely only good people on the internet, I promise you.
The internet's a great place.
Yeah.
This does sort of make me think of Barnaby Jack's infamous proof of concept on hacking a pacemaker by remote. And basically it's a great way of assassinating older politicians.
Who was it? Was it Rumsfeld who turned it off? Was it Donald Rumsfeld who turned off his pacemaker? Internet, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was one of those guys that was actually reporting into Bush at the time, and a similar time around when Barnaby released that exploit, that went and actually turned the functionality off on their pacemakers because they actually saw it as a real threat. So yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, that's not necessarily connected to the internet, but who's not to say that your pacemaker can't connect to your app sometime soon, and therefore, so in healthcare, it's going to be massively important how they're connecting their stuff, because there's so much extra cool functionality you'll be able to do that inside of healthcare. But how you do it is going to be a real issue for them. Yeah,
it sounds like that's actually going to become a part of a consumer choice as well. I mean, you guys are security experts. How do we mere mortal consumers assess this stuff?
Yeah, so when it comes to, I guess, people not like Josh and I, when it comes to assessing these things, just taking a look online, and when you're coming into these issues and you find things that don't quite look right, and you're reporting them through the vendor, if they're not listening to you, then taking it to the consumers, the Commerce Commission. Commerce Commission? Yeah. So taking your complaint to the Commerce Commission, reporting them through. If you're a more technically savvy person, plug for certain New Zealand, but they've got a vulnerability disclosure program. You can report these vulnerabilities, and then they can help you actually getting them patched. And then lastly, as Josh pointed out, and as you pointed out, is that, eventually sometimes these vulnerabilities go public. Researchers kind of point out the fact that we've tried to connect with you. We tried to help you get this fixed. This is going to cause harm to people. So sometimes the only way to do that is by naming and shaming, publishing research, publishing findings.
Is there a rule of thumb about what to do, about what device to buy and whether to plug it in?
Yeah, sure. For me, it comes down to, hey, Josh, do you want to connect your fridge to the internet? The answer is no, I'm good. I don't need to do that. And there's sort of like a semi-self-assessment on a creep fact that you can probably apply to, does that need to be connected to the internet? And really ask yourself, do I need that functionality in my life? Do I want that functionality in my life?
And it kind of comes down to, don't feel obligated to kind of trade off your data and your information just for that convenience. Just because your fridge might be able to scan all your contents and tell you when you're low on milk. Do you really need that convenience of trading off now it's got a microphone in your
kitchen?
Don't
be so lazy.
Well, you've probably paid $2,000 more for that convenience.
But it also, it kind of comes down to the concept of threat models as well. So, my threat model of being an InfoSec professional and dealing with a whole bunch of clients and confidential information is completely different from your own, Russell, which is, a journalist that probably has quite a bit of private information that's unpublished. And it kind of just comes down to, how do you want to secure yourself? So, I have certain things in my life that I want the convenience. So, I have a Google Home in my kitchen, and I use it to set kitchen timers because I'm lazy. But at the same time, I know that there's essentially a microphone in my kitchen. So perhaps I'm not taking client calls in my lounge. So it all kind of comes down to what you're comfortable with. But usually it comes down to, do I want this information out on the internet for anyone to access? And do I want this as like a tool for someone else to beat someone else up with?
Yeah, I guess the one thing that I've got in my house right now is I've got Arlo, which is it's a video camera setup that I can connect to an app, etc. But I've sort of thought about it and gone, well, what's really the harm here? I'm looking at is any of those cameras in a place that I don't really care, I really care about from a privacy perspective. And it's like, if Arlo or the manufacturer got really badly compromised, I'd probably be able to figure it out within a couple of days because of how crazy the media would go on it, given it's a big reputable brand. So you just have to factor in the use that you're getting out of it versus some of the risk. There's always going to be risk there, but can you tolerate that risk?
Well, that's vaguely reassuring, given that you're both professional paranoids. Is there anything else reassuring we can say?
Ooh.
You think we're the bearer of good news? That's not our job.
I think as, not to be super negative, but I think as technology develops and as the new regulation comes out, and as stuff changes, I think IoT will be a bit more of a, welcoming area. But right now, there's just lots of manufacturers that are just trying to pump out products. They're not thinking too much about security. And I think right now it's quite risky, but in 2, 3, 4 years' time, it could probably be a lot better with a bunch of these support mechanisms, maybe.
Yeah, I think, definitely growing. People are really focused around momentum on growing IoT, but I do think there is the pressure there from other parts of the industry, whether it's telco, whether it's governments, whether it's people buying them. There is pressure there for these products to actually be reasonably good. So, I've got faith in people that it will come right and that we will be able to sort of at least do the right things to protect, say, from a telco view, from Spark, to protect our customers. If they're going to go buying cheap, shoddy stuff, we'll try and work out how we can protect them the best we can.
I really appreciate the effort to be reassuring there, Josh. Thank you, and thank you, Erica. Independent security consultant Erica Anderson and Head of Spark Security Josh Bahlman. If you'd like to know more about IoT security, you can email iot@spark.co.nz. And if you want to know more about the Internet of Things in general, check out spark.co.nz/IoT. If you like this podcast, you may want to check out my other podcast, Actually Interesting, which is all about AI or artificial intelligence and is sponsored by Microsoft. You can find that in the Future section of the Spin-Off website or by searching your chosen pod platform. Thanks to today's guests, to Cooper Studios, to Gareth Thomas for our theme music, to Spark for making it all possible, and to you for joining us. We'll have another episode of the Internet of Awesome Things for you soon, and we'll still have 20 billion things to talk about.